Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Rocket Summer, a science fiction event for the month of July created by the always inventive Michael K. Vaughan, designed to celebrate classic science fiction before it was co opted by gatekeepers in the year 1970, so before the new wave happened. So we're starting with the very earliest years of the genre and then moving our way forward as July progresses. Except for me. I have not been doing that. I've instead been looking at various well known science fiction novels, more or less well known, and just picking them at random and rereading them. Most of these things I haven't read in decades. That's certainly true for our book today, by Judith Merril, the author writing under the name of Judith Merril. This is her book, The Tomorrow People. Uh, Once upon a time, I had this very pulpy paperback. I don't have it anymore. I looked. I thought sure I still had it. Although I doubt very much that I'm going to read this again. I read it once a long, long time ago, and then I read it. I read it in the 70s. And then I read it last night, and I don't think it deserved even a second reading, much less a third. I was hoping to find gold. That has happened in Rocket Summer. I have found gold in many different books that I thought I knew, many books where I had settled opinions. I found new elements, new dimensions to them that I could enjoy. I don't mean to speak ill of a Boston-born author, but this was not a case of that. This is it's set in a far-flung future world in which humanity has a base on the moon. They are exploring the rest of the solar system. They're making manned expeditions to Mars. Of course, it is the far future year, 1977. And, not to mock this author too much, but if space exploration hadn't constantly been kneecapped with budget cuts and public resistance and political weak will, I don't know about 1977, but it's entirely possible that by the turn of the 20th century to the 21st, we would have had a manned base on the moon. At least that, and maybe manned expeditions to Mars. The technology is there. It's insane that it's just been stopped and stopped and stopped. Nevertheless, that's not the main barrier to the willing suspension of disbelief in this book. Because the main MacGuffin at the beginning of this book, the main thing that you're going to care about as the book starts, is that Americans, the Soviets, have beaten America into space. Much like the looming threat of nuclear war, this was on everybody's mind back then, back in the 60s. Impossible to explain to you now, especially if you were born in the 21st century, but it was on everybody's mind all the time. America and this great nemesis that couldn't bake its own bread. And even though that is the case, Americans send an expedition to Mars. And the MacGuffin at the beginning of this book, the gimmick that governs the first half of this book, maybe a little more, is that an astronaut who has come back from Mars can't talk about it. Something horrible happened. Something traumatic, maybe, happened to him and his crew on Mars. And that has potential. And some of that potential is realized, especially once the book's main female character is introduced and starts to take more and more center stage. But to be gentle to Judith Merril, I think that when she was writing this, probably thought that she had a whole bunch of genre conventions that she needed to adhere to. There are moments in this book, especially in the second half of the book, where I sense impatience with a very smart author. There are moments that I sense impatience, and I wondered when I was rereading it last night if maybe that impatience isn't what I'd originally thought, which is, can I get this over with? It's obvious that the book doesn't interest the author. That's a terrible feeling to have when you're a reader. But it could be that impatience is, I wish I didn't have to put in all of these Rube Goldberg stuff. I wish I could just write, I could let this story go where it will. I wish, in other words, I sometimes, very lightly, I'm not meaning to oversell this thing, but very lightly, in a couple of places, I got the impression that this author wanted to write a book that would develop into the kind of psychological study that was the fiction she herself was reading and liking at the time. And it can't. It can't do that. Or it doesn't do that. I don't know if it could or not, but it doesn't do that. Instead, it's just it's the mid 1960s baked into a science fiction novel, and that wouldn't be so bad on its own. It would be bad, but it wouldn't be so bad on its own, except for the other willing suspension of disbelief that is something I've talked about on Rocket Summer, something that we're going to have to deal with Rocket Summer all the time, which is that it feels weird to say that a novel has been invalidated, but this novel has been invalidated. A large part of science fiction is the science part, and you can't walk around on Mars, and there's no life on Mars. It's not an unknown world the way it was when Judith Merril was writing this book. Although she'd been paying closer attention to findings from NASA, maybe it wouldn't have been quite so unknown. But the biggest thing here is that the Mars that we're being given here is a desert world, just like the Venus that we're getting in books written at this time is a sultry jungle world with surging black oceans full of tentacled monsters, when in fact the surfaces of both worlds are lifeless. There may be microbial life deep underground in Mars, in aquifers that retreated from the surface that was no longer protected by a strong magnetic field. And there may be microbes, living microbes, in the upper atmosphere of Venus, whose surface would break down biological matter of any kind. But there isn't anything like this. And so there's a big reveal. Of course, the big reveal that's hovering over the whole book is what actually happened. What is going on Mars? And if you're reading this in 2024, 50 years after the far future date in which Judith Merril set this book, then you know already that no matter what happens in the final reveal at the end of the book, which is fairly skillfully done, this is a fairly skillful author, you know that no matter what it is that happens at the climax of the book, it isn't happening on the real Mars. And it also, in the book, isn't happening on an alternate Mars, which it needs to be. It needs to be happening on an alternate Mars. Otherwise, I don't know, maybe it's not a problem for other people. It is for me. It is for me. Edgar Rice Burroughs makes it easy. When he puts Carson Napier on Venus or he puts John Carter on Mars, it's easy. He makes it easy, in my opinion, to think that they aren't our Mars or our Venus, that there's something else going on, that the transfer between the worlds seems at least metaphysical, at least as much metaphysical as it is technological. And that, to me, makes it think, okay, maybe Barsoom is a Mars of centuries ago or millennia ago, or maybe something like that, or an alternate version of Mars, something like that. Here, no. Here it's technology, and it got in my way. I feel certain, though, that even if the technology had been perfectly up to date, the book would still have gotten in my way, because it's not good. It's not good. The characters are shallow. They talk like an office comedy or an office romance. This is a very ordinary 1960s Harlequin romance that just is given a largely perfunctory science fiction backdrop. Now, I know that Judith Merril would have gnashed her teeth at that. And would have said that was incredibly sexist and condescending. The science fiction backgrounds of other books coming out this year by men are equally unconvincing. You don't seem bothered by that. But I do seem bothered by that. Other critics maybe not. But me, I don't like it in any case. The relationship stuff distracted me in a bad way from the science fiction stuff, and the science fiction stuff just underscored how uninteresting the relationship stuff was. So it didn't work at all. I was hoping to find a hidden gem here, but into every Rocket Summer, a couple of duds must fall, and this was one of them. I don't think I'll be reading The Tomorrow People again, but I was happy to give it another try. Certainly, a lot of the fun of a lot of the picks that I've done for a Rocket Summer has been that they've whet my appetite to read more of that author. And this author was one half of a writing duo, only a poorly kept secret in the science fiction community is that in that writing duo, she was much more than 50%. And that, I'm tempted to go to that author, that pseudonym, from here. Not all that tempted. I don't know where I'll go tonight, but I don't know. I don't know if I'll be anywhere near this author. But I was hoping that this would be better at observing social changes, better at observing technology and its import on the psychology of people who are directly involved in being its trailblazers. Didn't do any of that, not for me anyway. So that's my Rocket Summer report this time around. Not a stellar report, but what are you going to do? I'll pick another one, throw it on the pile, and report back next time. So I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.